Myanmar's military shuts down Facebook as it presses charges against Aung San Suu Kyi. The UN calling for international pressure to ensure Monday's coup does not succeed. The EU's top diplomat heading to Moscow later this Thursday, Josep Borrell says European foreign ministers will consider action against Russia over the jailing of Alexei Navalny. And UNESCO kicks off the Ocean Decade with a global event bringing together scientists, world leaders and philanthropists. Over the next 10 years, it hopes to raise awareness and increase sustainability. For those of you just joining us, welcome to the France 24 newsroom in Paris. I'm Alexander Orcott. Now we begin in Myanmar, where the Ministry of Communications has blocked access to Facebook, saying it's for the sake of stability. The UN, meanwhile, says that it will mobilize international pressure to ensure the failure of Monday's coup. Police have now filed charges against the ousted ruler Aung San Suu Kyi for illegally importing communications equipment, this in the form of 6 walkie-talkie devices. For more details, France 24 spoke earlier with Thomas Andrews, UN Special Reporter on human rights situation in Myanmar.
The healthcare workers in over 70 healthcare facilities are participating in this action. I understand that there are communication workers that are now actively engaged in discussions. Some of the trade unions are actively involved in discussions. Networks of attorneys are actively involved in discussions. So there's lots of discussions going on about various civil disobedient options. But there's lots of fear on the ground there. You know, this is a brutal military regime. This country lived underneath their rule for many, many years, so they understand just how brutal they can be. So there's fear, and there's a need for the international community to join with those inside fighting for their democracy and freedom. And it's a 1-2, I think, collaboration that's going to be necessary to get this job done. I think that the action needs to come immediately. I think that the international community needs to act with sanctions. There needs to be governments throughout the world getting those discussions underway. The sanction regimes exist in the European Union. They are in place. We just have to reactivate them. So it's a fairly straightforward, I think, from the point of view of mechanics of getting these sanctions engaged. The question now is, will the political will exist in areas like the European Union, the UK, and the United States?
Moving on now, and the EU's top diplomat has condemned the imprisonment of the Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, who's set to spend the next 2.5 years behind bars. Josep Borrell, who's visiting Russia this Thursday, said the bloc's foreign ministers will discuss the Navalny case and possible further actions at their upcoming meeting at the end of this month. Earlier, France 24's Brussels correspondent Dave Keating explained why it may be difficult for Europe to put more pressure on Moscow at this time.
You have countries in Eastern Europe which want to take a very hard line against Russia, and then you have other countries like Italy and Germany which have a softer approach toward Russia. The UK, interestingly, was always more in that hard line group, but of course now they're gone from the table. So that softer line approach tends to dominate. Now the EU does have sanctions in place already against Russia for the annexation of Crimea. So this is a question about putting sanctions in addition to those. But there are concerns from lots of EU countries that the sanctions won't make a difference in Russian behavior, and that starting a diplomatic war with Russia could result in bad economic consequences. Already, you already have a number of EU countries that are dependent on Russia for energy, for gas. And now, with the Sputnik vaccine, this is a new element to the whole debate here. That news yesterday about, or earlier this week, about the Sputnik vaccine out of Russia being more than 90% effective, that has the EU very interested in purchasing and approving that vaccine. And that gives a whole new reason for some people to be jittery about starting a confrontation with Russia right now at this moment.
The British authorities say the nation is now past its coronavirus peak, though much work remains to be done. More than 10 million people have now received at least one dose of COVID-19 vaccine, but a major effort is being made to test for more new strains that are still being discovered. So how worried should we be about these new variants, and will the vaccines still be effective against them? Andrew Hillier has the answers.
A painstaking scientific investigation is underway on British soil. researchers are trying to hunt down the latest mutation of coronavirus. So far, tests show that 11 people have contracted the newest mutation out of 214,000 positive coronavirus cases. This latest mutation shares genetic information that has also been seen in both the South African and Brazilian variants. But is there reason to worry? The answer is not quite. All viruses mutate. The first UK variant was shown to be more contagious. This second mutation shares that characteristic, but it may also cause the immune system's antibodies to be less effective in the case of reinfection, a concern for this disease expert.
Ce qu'on a vu, c'est qu'il y a une proximité à la fois avec le variant sud-africain, quand on regarde un petit peu le génome de ce variant du variant, mais également avec le brésilien, ce qui est peut-être plus inquiétant. On a vu à Manaus, si vous voulez, des gens qui étaient très proches de l'immunité collective. Il y a eu une réinfection extrêmement importante.
So will vaccines work as well against newer strains? Although the level of protection won't be as high, it will still be enough, according to researchers.
Ce qui est rassurant avec les vaccins pour lesquels on a déjà des données de ce point de vue-là, c'est que le taux d'anticorps neutralisants, donc les anticorps clés, sont très élevés. Et donc même si on a une réduction plus ou moins forte quand on est confronté à ces variants, le taux d'anticorps reste suffisamment fort pour qu'on soit très rassuré.
What's more, both Pfizer and Moderna say their mRNA vaccines could easily be adapted to fight newer strains of the virus.
Now, while the UK, as we saw there, has given at least one dose of vaccine to more than 10 million people, here in France the programme has been much slower, with just 1.6 million so far getting their jabs. Under fire, just over a year out from the next election, President Emmanuel Macron has pledged 4 sites will soon start making vaccines on home soil.
At this French vaccination centre, it's time for these patients to get their second dose. 2 COVID-19 vaccines are on offer here, those developed by the Pfizer and Moderna labs. In a few weeks, doses like this are expected to be produced by manufacturers in France, as the President outlined on Wednesday.
Ce qu'il faut réussir à mobiliser, ce sont tous les laboratoires qui permettent de produire ces vaccins homologués par nos autorités sanitaires pour le plus vite possible acquérir le maximum de doses en toute sécurité.
4 vaccine production sites have been identified so far, one in the west of the country that will manage Moderna's vaccine, one in northern France that will be responsible for the Pfizer vaccine, Sanofi lab in the Paris region that's expected to produce its own vaccine by the end of the year, and another in southwestern France that will be responsible for the CureVac vaccine once it's been approved. Apart from Sanofi, none of the sites are strictly producing the vaccine, rather they're bottling the doses. The vaccines that come from these sites will not only be for use in France, but the contribution is expected to help speed up the country's vaccination programme.
Le premier site de production qui démarrera, ça sera courant mars pour le vaccin Moderna. Nous aurons ensuite un site de production qui démarrera courant avril. Ce sera pour le vaccin Pfizer BioNTech. Et au mois de mai, ce devrait être pour le vaccin CureVac. Là, nous attendons l'autorisation de mise sur le marché.
The French government wants all those who wish to get vaccinated to be able to make an appointment by the end of the summer.
Well, contrary to most European countries right now that are tightening still further COVID restrictions, Italy decided this week to ease some of its measures in many areas of the country. Most of the Italian regions are moving from an orange alert level down to a yellow alert, which means that restaurants and bars can now reopen. Our correspondent in Italy, Natalia Mendoza, tells us more.
At last, the moment Italians have been waiting for impatiently. To be able to enjoy a meal on a restaurant terrace. Here, in the historic centre of the Italian capital, the feeling of satisfaction is visible.
Approfitti di quello che ormai ti concedono, quel poco da contenti e vai.
Si può andare in qualche ristorante o in qualche caffè, certo che siamo felici. E così a distanza ci troviamo con gli amici.
Since the beginning of the week, some 300,000 restaurants, bars and cafes in 16 regions of Italy have been authorised to reopen during the day, up till 6 p.m, whilst still respecting a number of rules to guarantee COVID health and safety.
L'igienizzazione del locale 2 volte al giorno, prevede il distanziamento tra i tavoli di 1 metro tra tavolo e un altro tavolo, massimo 4 persone a tavola.
Major tourist sites have also reopened, like the Colosseum or the Vatican museums. Here, there are no longer the habitual long queues. From now on, you can only enter with an online pre-booked ticket. And, after having your temperature taken,
Signore, può guardarmi qui verso la camera, grazie.
Using thermal cameras.
Va bene, perfetto, può andare.
Rispettare il bene della salute delle persone, quindi il nostro personale tiene tutti la mascherina, hanno i guanti per chi ha rapporti con i turisti, con i visitatori. Cerchiamo di ridurre al minimo il rischio del contagio.
And to avoid overcrowding in the museums, the number of visitors has been reduced. For the privileged few this morning, the atmosphere is difficult to believe.
È veramente emozionante, possono ammirare con calma tutte le opere in pace che prima ci fatica.
È un po' strano essere da soli in questo posto dove solitamente è sempre pieno di gente.
However, there are some restrictions that remain in place, like the curfew from 10 p.m. to 5 in the morning. And travel between regions remains prohibited throughout the country.
Well, staying in Italy, and Mario Draghi has accepted a request by the president to form a new government following the collapse of Giuseppe Conte's coalition. The former European Central Bank boss was credited with helping save the euro. So now, can he rescue his home country from its own political crisis? Seema Gupta has this from Rome.
If you look at his background, he was a vice president at Goldman Sachs. He then led the Bank of Italy before moving on to become the president of the European Central Bank. He was there from 2011 all the way to 2019. And he was there critically when the region was dealing with that Eurozone debt crisis. And those famous words he said, to do whatever it takes to save the euro. And he did in that role. So really, a central banker, if you like, one of them. But now he's taking on a more political role. So we'll have to see whether he succeeds in that front as well. And considering the financial issues that Italy is dealing with right now, some 450,000 jobs lost in the last 1 year, a GDP that fell by 8.8% over the last year as well, largely because of the pandemic. So he's got his job cut out for him. But as he said, you have that Eurozone recovery fund money coming in, and it's a chance that for the country to do a lot with that 200 billion euros.
Now, UNESCO, the UN body normally tasked with designating World Heritage sites like towns and buildings to make sure that they're protected, has started a decade where it wants to focus on protecting the ocean. The initiative was kick-started with the global broadcast Brave New Ocean, which brought together world leaders, scientists, philanthropists and heads of UN agencies to highlight the important role it plays in all of our lives. Olivia Bizot explains.
It provides us with the oxygen we breathe. It feeds us and regulates our climate. Yet the next decade could be critical for the ocean's future.
The ocean faces unprecedented threats due to human activity. By 2050, there may be more plastic than fish in the sea. And all the world's tropical coral reefs could be dead by the end of the century if we don't act now. Protecting and sustainably managing the ocean is essential for food, livelihoods, and mitigating climate disruption and related disasters.
To highlight these challenges and to deepen our scientific knowledge of the sea, the UN has launched a decade-long ocean revolution. 80% of the ocean is unmapped and unexplored. 1 million species could still wait to be discovered. Through stronger international cooperation, the Ocean Decade will provide funding to boost scientific research, with the hope of finding solutions to sustainably manage marine resources and to raise public awareness.
Through the development of ocean literacy, which is a way of presenting to people the role that ocean plays in their life and their impact on the ocean.
The virtual event A Brave New Ocean launched the 2021 to 2030 UNESCO initiative and brought together global leaders, scientists and sports personalities engaged in ocean action. It will be the first of many.
Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more world news on France 24.
In
In 2016, Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos received the Nobel Peace Prize for his part in bringing an end to the war with the FARC. After 50 years of guerrilla conflict, hardened veterans surrendered their weapons and returned to civilian life. But in 2018, following the election of Ivan Duque, the agreement was amended by the ruling party. Violence erupted. History seemed to be repeating itself. 250 former FARC members were assassinated. Our reporters followed an ex-combatant who's rebuilt his life away from the fighting. Today, he knows that peace is uncertain.
Reporters presented by Mark Owen on France 24 and France24.com.